Last year, I went into the new Pixar movie expecting it to be passable at worst and ended up getting one of the most horrifically written films I've ever seen. This year, I went into the new Pixar movie expecting it to be passable at worst and ended up coming out of the theater really pleasantly surprised, which I am so relieved about because rather than having to rant about how bad this film is for over an hour and then proceeding to slowly create a second, much longer, much more in-depth video ripping apart every scene of that dumpster fire frame by frame, which by the way, I know you guys are sick of waiting. Stay tuned for the end of the video for an update on the Lightyear critique. It might not be what you want to hear, but it'll be the truth. Anyway, rather than doing all of that, I can just make a super quick video giving my general thoughts on the movie, which is what I wanted to do last year for Lightyear before I actually saw it, and it ended up being, you know, the worst thing Pixar has ever created. I really cannot stress to you how little of a damn I gave about Elemental throughout the past half year. It did absolutely nothing to impress me with any of its trailers, and it also did absolutely nothing to offend me. It just existed. It was a movie I knew was coming out eventually, and really only felt interested in seeing out of obligation because, well, it's the new Pixar movie. I'm sure people are gonna be curious what I think about it, so I gotta go see it. And I kinda expected this to be another Strange World situation, where the marketing was laughable, barely anybody ever talked about it other than to say, oh yeah, this exists, I guess. Then I went to see it and forgot it almost immediately after I walked out of the theater. Disney seemed to give equally little of a shit about trying to actually convince people to watch both of them. Of course, for some people, the lack of desire to see Elemental came not from the marketing, but on the basis of Peter Sohn being the director. Partially for the memes, because hey look, the funny cat's directing a movie.
Hello, Buzz. I am Socks.
But more so because his only previous directorial credit was the colossal failure known as The Good Dinosaur. I wasn't as willing to jump onto that bandwagon because the production of that film is notorious for having been a total nightmare, and I do not hold any of its faults, of which there are numerous, against him or the team. He was thrust into the position of directing it after the original director was let go from the project, leaving it entirely up to him to try to get this story in shape. I obviously can't speak authoritatively to the ins and outs of the production, but as an outsider looking in, it always seemed to me like Peter Sohn was trying his hardest to make the best of a terrible situation and just try to salvage something worthwhile, and I do not believe The Good Dinosaur being crap has much, if anything, to do with his directorial capabilities. Which is why, even with the whole world having seemingly collectively agreed Elemental wasn't worth seeing for one reason or another, I was more than willing to go in with an open mind and give it a fair shake. And thanks to that, I came out the other end actually really enjoying myself. I sort of feel crazy for even saying that because nearly everyone I've seen online appears to have greatly disliked it, so let me be perfectly clear. When I say that I enjoyed Elemental, I do not mean that I loved it. Far from it, in fact. I'm not here to come to the defense of this film as some hidden masterpiece that's being unfairly dunked on by critics. It did not blow me away, and I did not walk out of the theater with the same feeling as films like Inside Out and Coco left me with, but I did walk out feeling mostly content, which is still leaps and bounds ahead of how I felt towards the last few Pixar releases. I'm just not super intimately attached to it on a personal level. I also think I'm still sort of fluctuating on my feelings towards this film. My gut reaction was positive, and I enjoyed watching it, but the more I've gone back to think about it afterwards, the more problems I have with it, and it all sort of balances out in the end to be somewhere in the middle. So because of that, I won't be going beat by beat or too in-depth like I typically do for movies. This will be a much brisker review, broadly discussing the things that I liked and the things I didn't, of which there are several, and of which I believe to be somewhat significant. And unlike my Lightyear review last year, I won't be discussing any spoilers throughout most of this video. When I get to some of the criticisms I have, I will be diving into major spoiler territory of basically the entire last act of the film for a little bit, but I will also be sure to signpost that section when we get there. And just like last time, due to the film still being shown in theaters and the absence of a Disney Plus release at this current point in time, I will be primarily relying on gameplay in the background and won't be able to visually demonstrate a lot of what I'm talking about. As for why I chose Super Mario Galaxy, and specifically Freeze Flame Galaxy, I kinda think that speaks for itself given the subject matter. If you don't know, Elemental is set in a place called Element City, comprised of fire, water, air, and earth beings, and tells a love story between Ember Lumen and Wade Ripple, who stumble into each other's lives through a series of inconvenient events and go on to form a special connection in spite of how much Ember's dad does not want her consorting with water people whatsoever. Oh, and also they have to work together to find the source of a water leak before it floods Firetown, because I guess they thought just being a character-driven romance wasn't enough to captivate audiences, and they had to throw in the most side quest to have ever side quested for a main plot. Fortunately, though, that plug the leak mission is over almost as soon as it begins and doesn't really affect the movie in any major way until the third act rolls around, at which point they go all out with the big action-heavy climax because of course they did. Having said that, I do really appreciate how low stakes Elemental is. It's refreshing to see the scope of the conflict dialed down significantly compared to the end-of-the-world plot of Lightyear and the huge-ass anime battle of Turning Red. Not every story needs to be about saving the universe from destruction. Elemental is incredibly down-to-earth, which means that the runtime almost exclusively consists of appropriately slow and well-paced interactions between the main characters that build up naturally as the story progresses, both for the forbidden romance of Ember and Wade, as well as the relationship Ember has with her father and the tensions that come about as her life starts to pull her in two different directions. The plot is really only there to serve as a vessel that allows the characters to develop, and specifically in the case of a love story, the most important thing it has to nail above all else is the relationship between the two main characters. If I don't buy into that, then there's really no point in even watching at all, because everything hinges upon that connection. And based purely on how they were shown to be interacting in the trailers, I wasn't too sure how successful they'd be in that endeavor. Even in the movie itself, while I found Ember to be compelling straight away and was invested in the dynamic she had with her father after just the opening montage, I initially did not like Wade at all. In fact, I might even say I found him borderline obnoxious to begin with, but it wasn't long after his opening scene that started to change, and he went from a whiny, annoying waterspout to a chill and super endearing dude that really grew on me. And the chemistry between these two feels 100% earned. Even though they only have 90 minutes to work with, the relationship never felt like it was moving along too expediently. It takes a bit of time before they really start to warm up to each other, and once they do, it's not a light switch moment where they go from constantly getting on each other's nerves to being madly in love. And that's largely thanks to the fact that there is no pressing mission that has to be balanced out with their development. The water leak is a thing they have to deal with, yes, but like I said, it only really rears its ugly head in the finale, and it's a total non-issue for most of the film. Because that ticking clock isn't there for the characters, most of the time, they're allowed to just sit in the moment and soak in the atmosphere of the scene, whether they're relaxing on a beach, bonding in Wade's apartment, or enjoying the sights of Element City in a hot air balloon. The plot of trying to stop the flood is entirely secondary to their relationship, so there's no sense of a go, go, go attitude to keep the story moving along. Its primary focus is on fleshing out the characters, and they did a great job with that. Everything is kept extremely simple, so the movie never gets bogged down in extensive exposition through how Element City works or how the characters navigate the world. You learn everything you need to know about how Ember and the rest of the Fire People work in the opening montage without any narration or expository dialogue, and the dynamic, malleable nature of Wade's design is also made clear after just the opening chase between him and Ember. I loved seeing Ember try to blockade him from reaching his destination with her fire powers, only for him to just dissolve into the ground and just go around the problem like an inkling in Splatoon. And any moment when the characters get to show off what they can do with their elemental abilities is aided by these spectacular animation. I don't usually take the time to praise that for Pixar movies, at least not to a significant degree, because as I always say, graphical fidelity naturally evolves over time as technology advances. It's why Lightyear's animation and art style genuinely does nothing for me. Like, yeah, it's pretty, it's mechanically impressive, but it doesn't wow me. It doesn't dazzle the eye and suck you into the world because everything just looks so bland. But Elemental isn't just more realistic or higher fidelity than the films of the past. It has a style that's vibrant and eye-catching without feeling too oversaturated, and the manner in which the elements navigate and engage with the environment around them is entirely seamless and mesmerizing to watch. I can't even fathom the research and development that went into perfecting all of these element-based characters and having them interact with each other. One of my favorite examples, and also one that I can actually show you because it was in the trailers, is when we see Wade wearing headphones and watching the sound waves affect his body as the music blasts through the speakers. That stands out to me way more than just having a higher poly count or fancier lighting. And beyond just the style, I also found the cinematography to be quite captivating at times. There were several sequences like when Ember's walking under the bridge alone at night, or when she and Wade are watching the sunset at the beach, that I thought, wow, that's a really compelling shot. Somebody took the time to think about how best to communicate the story in a visually interesting way here. Shots that actually struck a chord with me and had an artistic intent beyond simply going, hey, look at how pretty everything is, and this shot we probably made specifically for the trailers as eye candy and for literally no other reason. And the one part that really stood out to me was when the camera zooms into Ember's eye and there's a little dance between specially stylized and semi-abstract depictions of Ember and Wade. It's nothing particularly jaw-dropping. Again, I have plenty of praise for Elemental, but I don't want to make it sound like I'm overselling it. I don't believe anything in this movie to be truly jaw-dropping, and it certainly doesn't come anywhere close to matching the genius shot composition of things like The Batman or Better Call Saul. But still, the cinematography did resonate with me here. That and the entirety of the underwater date sequence made me think, wow, there's a much greater sense of artistry and purpose in the staging of these scenes than I was expecting. More work went into the animation of this film than simply trying to make it look more real. I've talked before about how I feel like the soul of Pixar's animation isn't quite what it used to be, but this is the exact style and life I was looking for, and I loved it. I was fully pulled into the screen to the point where I can honestly say I believe it to be worthy of seeing on the big screen in a movie theater. Also, Elemental was way funnier than I expected it to be. I don't want to talk about the comedy too much so as not to spoil the jokes for those who haven't seen it yet, but for those who have seen Elemental, a couple standout moments where I laughed were the cement joke, the joke where Wade magnifies his inspector badge, and the entirety of the doorman battle outside Wade's apartment. Speaking purely anecdotally, my whole audience, kids and adults alike, seemed to respond very positively to the humor, even more than I did. Unlike the dumbass short which preceded it, Carl's Date, during which the audience was dead silent the whole way through because that short is painfully unfunny and sorta disappointing, but I digress. Elemental is certainly no laugh-out-loud riot in the style of the original Toy Story, but I still did really get a lot out of the comedy. And I think my surprise at how effective the humor was goes back to the awful marketing campaign, because the film's worst jokes are the ones shown off in the trailers, such as the whole
two kids that are swimming around here somewhere. Orca! Follow!
I audibly sighed when I first heard that in the trailer. Oh, also this.
You're so hot.
Excuse me?
No, I mean, like, you're smoking. No, I didn't mean it like that.
Are you done yet?
Aha! Shoot me. A problem I often have with comedies, or at least movies with comedic elements, is that the trailers tend to showcase the best jokes they have to offer, and then when you see the movie itself, you've already watched the funniest bits, and there's nothing left for you to really gain. But Elemental's marketing had that problem in the opposite direction, where the dumbest humor was what they used to try to convince you to watch the movie. They also did the same thing with the more character-driven scenes. When I heard these lines,
why does anyone get to tell you what you can do in your life?
I've been trying to fill my father's shoes, but I never once asked what I wanted to do.
my eyes almost rolled out of my head. They felt so unbelievably ham-fisted, and it made me think that was how every scene was gonna be written. But again, the worst of it is in the trailers, which, on the one hand, I'm glad to see the movie ended up being better written than I was led to believe, but on the other, you guys really did not put your best foot forward with the marketing of this movie, and oh boy does it show in the box office numbers. Oh, and then there was this.
You just got to be my date.
Sorry, buddy. Elements don't mix.
Yeah, that's why you can't be his date. Not because he's a very small child and you're an adult, but because elements don't mix. That's the reasoning you went with. Who wrote that? Can we stop doing the whole child flirting with an adult thing, please? It's getting on my nerves. Now, I will say the jokes aren't all winners. There's one that wasn't in the trailers that actually kind of ticked me off a little bit. When Ember goes to visit Wade's family at their apartment, she participates in what they call the crying game. How do you play the crying game, you ask? Well, it's simple. All you gotta do is try to make the other person cry. And literally the first attempt made by a character to get someone else to cry is to remind them of the day that their Nana passed away, at which point they then proceed to burst into tears, exclaiming that they never got the chance to say goodbye. Now, maybe this is more of a personal thing as someone who also did not get the chance to say goodbye to his grandfather, but that joke just ripped me right out of the movie, because it's treated as completely normal that this family constantly brings up these memories for the sake of a fun little game, and it's played entirely for laughs. Like, no, these are not funny ha-has. I do not, in fact, find humor in watching people being forced to relive extremely emotionally harrowing experiences. Like, what are we doing here? And to a far lesser extent, there's also a really heartfelt scene between Ember and Wade toward the end of the movie where she emotionally opens up to him about what she really wants out of life, and then it's immediately undercut with a stupid joke where Grandma catches them and then takes forever to run down the stairs and actually try to talk to them. It's lame. Which I guess makes this a good place for me to say that there were definitely some things that annoyed me about Elemental. Some small, others not so much. One small thing from early on in the movie that I took issue with is shortly after Ember and Wade first meet. After Wade bursts through the pipes into Ember's dad's shop, he says that the whole place isn't up to code and leaves to go report it to the city officials, which will wind up getting the joint shut down. But Ember doesn't plead her case to him, asking him to please not report her until after he's already submitted his report. Her gut reaction upon him saying he's gonna write the place up is to say, "My dad built this place himself!" And Wade just says, "He did? Wow, he built all these pipes." and none of them are up to code, or something along those lines. But then, after Ember fails to chase Wade down and stop him from sending the report, she breaks down and drops to her knees, basically begging for him to stop because of how important the shop is to her family, and he responds by saying, "Oh, I wouldn't have sent the report if I knew that." And you're just sitting there like, really? It's really annoying to me that the entire movie would have just stopped dead in its tracks had Ember done this not 2 minutes earlier. She had plenty of time to do so as well. They were both in the basement for a couple minutes before he makes a break for it. She just waited until it was too late to actually try the emotional sob story that works on him, and that you'd think her character would have wanted to try first, seeing as it's not some Saul Goodman performance she's putting on for him. She is speaking from her heart and gets genuinely emotional about what's happening here, so I would have assumed it would have been her instincts to try that strategy first, but oh well. I also just feel like there was a lot of wasted potential in regards to the world in which these characters reside. You ostensibly have a city comprised of 4 different elemental entities, but really you have fire, you have water, and then basically no one else matters. You have the one sports game where you get to see all the wind characters in action while the main focus is still on Ember and Wade, and then you have the one Earth kid who only exists in this movie to make things uncomfortable, and I guess also these people.
Nothing weird going on here.
Just a little pruning.
Earth and Wind may as well not even be present in the film at all, which is a real shame. And it's sorta emblematic of the problem that I have with Elemental as a whole. The story of Ember and Wade is really heartfelt, and as someone who values character above all else in storytelling, I'm glad that they were well fleshed out. But when set against this marvelously intriguing world, it really just seems like such a waste to focus exclusively on them and sorta gloss over the world at large. Which isn't to say that they should be sidestepped or belittled in favor of expanding the world some more. Like I said earlier, the most important thing in a love story is the dynamic between your lead characters. But I feel like you still could have kept them being the focus of the story while also showing off more of what Element City has to offer. A lot of people have been wanting to compare this movie to Zootopia by saying it's just a different version of that story, which isn't true at all. They frankly couldn't be more distinct from one another with the type of stories they want to tell. I do, however, think it's a worthwhile comparison to make because in Elemental, the fact that the characters are elements feels entirely secondary and meaningless, whereas in Zootopia, the characters being animals is what the core story is centered around. And even though the movie is largely focused on the dynamic between Nick and Judy and the mystery they have to solve, they still make sure to take you around as many possible areas of interest in Zootopia as they can. So that was kind of disappointing. But by far, my biggest issues with Elemental all stem from the end of the second act and how that leads into the third act. And this is where I'm going to throw up a big ol' spoiler warning. Skip ahead to this timestamp to bypass the spoilers, because I cannot discuss my problems with the finale of this movie without going into detail about it all. So Elemental has a second act breakup. An actual breakup between the characters at the second act low point. I know it's not exactly impossible to predict that this was going to happen given how formulaic, almost algebraic it is in a lot of animated movies, including all 3 of Pixar's most recent releases. Actually, 4, 5, 6. God damn it, can we please stop doing this shit? Wreck-It Ralph is the only time in recent memory that I have actually seen this executed in a way that naturally fits the story, doesn't feel forced, and gets me genuinely emotional. Everything else since then has just been pure cringe every single time, and it's no different here. But believe it or not, my issue isn't even so much with the fact that they split apart at the end of the second act only for them to reunite less than a minute later. It's annoying, sure, but I've watched this exact scene play out so many times at this point that I just sort of roll my eyes and deal with it. What genuinely surprised me, and really rubbed me the wrong way, was the scene that immediately follows the breakup. Ember is at her dad's retirement party where he's getting ready to relinquish ownership of the shop over to her, but then Wade crashes the party and loudly proclaims his love for Ember in front of everyone. And to be blunt, he's kinda an ass about it. It's bad enough that he does this publicly rather than privately, which embarrasses the hell out of her, but he also accidentally lets it slip that she was the one to burst open the pipes at the beginning of the movie, which her parents did not know, and rather than cowering in the corner pissed at himself for screwing up, he then almost immediately turns to Ember and says, "Take the chance, tell him how you really feel," basically forcing her hand by putting her in a very uncomfortable spot, and inadvertently revealing to her parents that he was her secret lover all this time. And frankly, this really pissed me off when I saw it because they had done such a great job making you empathize with Wade and buying into the relationship he has with Ember throughout the entire movie, and then you get to this part where he just storms into the party and exposes exposes Ember's secrets long before she was ready to share them with her dad. They try to lampshade this by having him say, "I thought of more reasons we couldn't be together. For instance, I'm crashing your father's party. What kind of a jerk am I?" To which Ember says, "A pretty big one." Like, yeah, calling out the problem doesn't make it less of a problem though. And of course, this is all completely forgotten when he comes back for the third act to help Ember save her dad's shop from being flooded with dialogue that's basically one for one this exchange from Moana.
You came back!
I really love Moana, but this is by far the worst part of it, and I hate it so much. And I don't know, man, the film sorta just lost me around this point. The final 60 seconds or so before the credits roll, where Ember says goodbye to her parents and offers her father the same respectful bow he was never offered by his parents when he left his home to come to Ember City, is great in isolation, and it might have hit me really hard in the feels had the preceding events not ripped me right out of the story, because by this point, I'd sorta stopped rooting for Ember and Wade to even get together at all. And maybe I'm alone in this, so if you've seen this movie, let me know if this scene was too much for you as well, or if it didn't affect how you saw them as a couple at all. If it was just the second act breakup, I could look past that, because even movies I love, like Moana and Zootopia, fall victim to this stupid trope. But then, during the big flooding climax, they also do the thing I absolutely hate, where they kill off one of the main characters, and then bring them back to life so they can both have the emotional farewell scene, but also have the happily ever after. Now, I will say, there are ways in which you can do that well. It is possible for you to tie such a resurrection into the themes and character development of your story in a completely natural and seamless way without feeling cheap. And I would never dare to start dreaming of spoiling any examples I've been watching recently that pull that off flawlessly, but they do exist. The way Elemental does it, however, not so much. So basically, Ember and Wade end up trapped inside a very small room. They can't unblock the door or else the flood will extinguish Ember, and they can't stay trapped forever because Wade will evaporate from the heat. Wade chooses to sacrifice himself so Ember can live and evaporates, seemingly killing him. But then Ember calls back to the crying game from earlier by reciting the story which caused him to cry, thus forcing his water to be sucked out of the walls bit by bit, which then gathers in a bucket and reforms into Wade. And it's not like the science doesn't check out here. Wade evaporates into water vapor and then condenses into the ceiling after a few minutes. The timeline might be somewhat expedited, but from my understanding of evaporation, this all follows logically. If I'm wrong about that, then please let me know in the comments, but this all seems to line up with the water cycle to me. It's the forcing Wade to cry part that confuses me. Forcing his water droplets out of the ceiling goes on to restore him completely back to normal like nothing ever happened at all. Putting aside how this resurrection carries no greater significance beyond making sure Ember and Wade can live happily ever after and undoing the emotional value of their goodbye, I just don't really buy that this would work. Like, you'd think that evaporating into a completely different state of matter and seemingly temporarily dying might have some effect on you, but I guess not. Like, what defines his consciousness exactly when he's dispersed into so many different water particles across the room? And really, I think this just opens the door to a flood of world-building questions that you could ask. Here's another one. Why are Ember and Wade able to touch? One of the first thoughts I had when I first heard the premise for this movie was, yes, a story of forbidden love between two elements who would literally kill each other if they touched. I get it. I wonder how they're gonna explain eventually being able to embrace each other by the end of the movie. They don't. No attempt is made to explain how they can touch, hug, and even kiss each other. They just can. For some reason. I have no idea why, and neither does the movie, even though they make it quite clear towards the beginning that Wade is in constant danger of extinguishing Ember, and Wade clearly doesn't respond well to anything relating to heat. They're just able to touch with no consequences. There's a throwaway line at the party scene where Wade says that, "We changed each other's chemistry," but I seriously doubt the writers put any additional thought into what that line actually means and how them falling in love somehow manages to override the science of fire and water. Especially since, like I just said, the film ends with Wade succumbing to the heat and evaporating. I don't know, man, doesn't seem like your chemistry was all that changed. Also, is this really the first time in the entire history of Element City that two people from different elemental backgrounds fell in love with each other? Do we buy this? Because I'm not really sure I buy that, if I'm being honest. I also don't like the implication that it's even necessary for them to touch in the first place. Like, they can still have a lasting relationship even if they never have any physical contact. In fact, I might argue that it would have been even more meaningful had the conclusion been, we don't need to hug or kiss to prove we love each other, we can still feel that our connection is real. Sort of like how, when Ember's mom forces them to engage in a ritual of love thing, she tries to prove that they can't be together because Wade can't light the flame and therefore it wasn't meant to be. But he figures out another way to do it by magnifying Ember's flame through the reflective nature of his body like a magnifying glass, and so the physical act of passion and love they were told was a natural part of being in a relationship was demonstrated to be entirely arbitrary as they figured out an alternate method of engaging with it. You had the message on point with that scene, but I guess you sorta abandoned the idea when it came time for them to actually touch. They just had to make them embrace each other and also didn't put in the legwork to establish how that's even possible. As it stands, I suppose the idea is that their love is so strong it overpowers the rules they clearly outlined earlier in the movie. Somehow. I don't know how, and I don't think the movie does either. Especially when we can clearly see Ember touching plenty of objects that should theoretically be bursting into flames, such as cardboard boxes or paper brochures, and yet absolutely nothing happens to them. And honestly, I think if I really took the time to dissect the world building of Elemental in extensive detail, I would be able to find a truckload of issues with it. I mean, I won't do that, because I'm not passionate enough about this movie to want to do so, but if someone out there wants to put Element City under the microscope, I'm not entirely confident in its ability to withstand that pressure. But I wouldn't cite any of these issues as things that destroy the entire movie. They're annoying, certainly, and they did affect my overall enjoyment, but not to any hugely significant degree. I still walked out of the theater with a smile on my face. Look, Elemental isn't anything particularly new or groundbreaking in terms of story. There are no real surprises to be found here with the narrative. But honestly, if it's a choice between a story that pulls bullshit plot twist out of its ass at the 11th hour just to yank the rug out from under the audience even if it makes absolutely no sense, and a story that plays it safe that's still mostly coherent and endearing, I will happily take the latter. This is a very heartfelt story that's clearly rooted in the director's personal inspirations, created with a genuine passion and artistic style. This doesn't feel like a corporate product that exists solely to try and fail to bring in easy money. Someone asked me if I think this is the best Pixar movie since Soul, and after thinking about it for the past week, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know. I'm still undecided on that one. I mean, it's obviously way better than Turning Red and Lightyear, but I keep going back and forth on whether this or Luca is the better film. Luca's ending made me cry, while I can't say the same for Elemental, but I don't really want to use an emotional response as a metric for judgment because that's gonna boil down to the individual person. I didn't connect with Elemental as much as I did with Luca, but I have seen plenty of people saying that they cried a lot while watching this one, so it's definitely possible for the themes and character dynamics of this film to strike a much more personal chord with you than it did for me. Elemental might be a more consistently solid and well-rounded experience than Luca, but I'm honestly not sure. I'll have a more definitive answer when I make my Pixar ranking video. The thing is, even though I enjoyed it, I'm still not particularly passionate about it. So you definitely won't see me revisiting this one in the future with an extended breakdown like I'm planning for Lightyear. I've seen some people saying Elemental is total crap and others saying it's a top 5 Pixar movie, whereas I would just call this good. But hey, maybe I missed something. Maybe I missed some major plot-breaking issues or overlooked some key elements that elevate this to the same level as Pixar's masterpieces. So this is where I open the floor to you guys for those of you who have seen Elemental. Did you love it? Did you hate it? And if so, why? I feel like I could be easily convinced to either raise or lower my score based on what other people say because I've only seen it once and like I said, am not super invested in it as a whole. So be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments below, whether you think I missed some crucial details that break the story, or if you think I'm underselling its strengths, or if you're like me and just think it's overall pretty decent. For the moment, I will confidently say that it is leagues better than all the other crap Pixar's been giving us over the last 2 years, but not quite good enough to repair the reputation of the studio in my head. After Pixar's string of stumbles in the early 2010s, seeing Inside Out in 2015 showed me that the Pixar magic was still there, and it got me looking forward to the next release. After Toy Story 4 destroyed everything about the original trilogy, Onward convinced me Pixar wasn't a total lost cause, and Soul left me speechless by the credits with how tremendously powerful it was. Elemental is nowhere near either of those in terms of the impact it's left on me or how it's altered my feelings towards the studio at large. It's not that great. I still have no faith in Inside Out 2 being good, but I can nonetheless say that this was a pleasant surprise that I can happily recommend to people, especially seeing how it's performing at the box office. Like, holy shit, this is so depressing. I knew Lightyear damaged Pixar's reputation, but I didn't think it knocked them down this much. Okay, so something I saw a lot of people saying before release was that you gotta go see Elemental. Even if it looks meh or you don't think you'll like it, you gotta support this on principle to show Pixar that people want more original movies. And if you don't see it, then you can't complain when they give us more sequels. But that's not something I can get on board with. I don't like the idea of supporting a movie regardless of its quality just to get more original films, even if it's not something you'd be personally interested in seeing. It's entirely possible for someone to say, I want Pixar to tell more original stories, while also saying, this particular original story doesn't look that interesting to me. Those are not mutually exclusive positions for someone to hold. If Elemental was bad, I would not want to send the message that this level of storytelling was something I'd be content with getting every year. However, because I would say Elemental is actually pretty good, I will tell you guys with no shame or moral quandaries whatsoever to go see this movie in theaters. I know not everyone is currently in a position to be able to go to the theater for one reason or another, be it financially or for health concerns, and that's totally valid and understandable. But for those of you who have the means to go to a theater, I strongly recommend you go see Elemental. I'm not gonna fearmonger you into doing it by saying animation is dead if you don't support every single one of Pixar's original releases, but I also really do not want Pixar's takeaway from this to be that the only guaranteed path to financial stability is to churn out sequel after sequel, and then we get Monsters Inc. 2, Finding Nemo 3, and Incredibles 3. And if they ever even dare to make Coco 2, I might actually fucking explode. Again, I would not be saying this if Elemental was crap, but it's not, so I encourage you to go show this movie some support. That said, if you really don't think it's up your alley, that's fine, and I can't force you to do anything you don't want to. Pixar has always been at their best when they were telling original stories. Toy Story 2 and 3 were the exception, not the rule. Believe me, Pixar, I do not just want to see more of the characters I already know and love. Y'all burned that bridge several times over, and my optimism for Toy Story 5 is born out of blind faith more than anything else. But Elemental is proof to me that it is still possible for Pixar to get back to that point. It's not amazing, but it's a step in the right direction, and I hope that they can build back up momentum moving forward into the future. Thanks for watching, everyone. This is a far cry from the extensive multi-hour breakdowns you're used to seeing from me, and definitely not my preferred style of critique. I much prefer when I can go into extensive detail about the content I'm covering, but in the case of Elemental, I just really don't think there was that much to talk about that warranted a super lengthy breakdown, and I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. If you're wondering what my next video is going to be, it's going to be a review of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny when that comes out next week. I know, the movie everybody's already written off as awful before it's even properly come out, but you know what? I'm not letting anything dissuade me from seeing this movie. I've been a massive Indiana Jones fan ever since I was a kid, and I'm hoping that the character gets a satisfying swan song after the colossal train wreck of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But whether it's good or bad, I will definitely be covering it on the channel, and that is what you can look forward to seeing from me next. Okay, bye-bye, everybody. What? Was there something else you guys wanted to hear about? Alright, fine, I'll talk about my updated Lightyear critique. To everyone who's been repeatedly asking about the Lightyear video, I hear you. Believe me, I've heard you all loud and clear in comments on my Discord server, and even through some emails I've received asking when in the name of the Titan am I ever gonna release the Lightyear video. Here's some behind the scenes information. I finished the script for that video in November of last year. I finished recording and editing the commentary for it in December of last year. Theoretically, the only thing I would have left to do is edit the visuals and call it a day, which isn't something I want to make sound easy, because it's not, to be clear. The visual editing is by far the most time-consuming and intensive step of the process, but still, all the writing and recording has been done for a while. That was, of course, until I watched movies like Interstellar and realized how many parallels there were to Lightyear, and how I wanted to talk about that in my video as a point of comparison for how you can tell this story so much more effectively than they did here. And until Pixar announced Toy Story 5 out of nowhere back in February, which sorta entirely nullified the original ending that I had written for the video, and until Pete Docter said this bullshit, and until the recent wave of layoffs hit Pixar. Point being, there's a lot that I've had to retroactively factor into the script of this video that wasn't there originally, leading to more redrafts, more commentary recording, and just generally more restructuring that has caused the Lightyear video to be delayed many times. And to be perfectly transparent, all of that contributed to me ultimately losing motivation to work on it for a while. Which is not to say that I no longer want to make it at all. That wouldn't be fair to you guys. I've teased it for over half a year at this point, and I still fully intend to deliver on my promise to dive into Lightyear much more extensively. But I can no longer promise a date for when it's going to be finished. I'm working on it a little bit every day, but the bulk of my time is dedicated to projects that I'm simply more passionate about. So you will still see the video, I just don't really know when, and am not gonna promise a release window for it, which is a principle that I want to adopt for all my projects moving forward. Every time I've tried to nail down a release date for a video in the last half year, I have failed miserably to deliver on it for one reason or another, so I'm just not gonna try anymore. If you really want to keep up to date with what I'm working on, you can join my Discord server linked in the description below. I'm decently active on there, and will semi-frequently post something in the future project teasers channel, letting everybody know how one of my projects is coming along. But as far as saying, it'll be out during this month, or on this day, I'm not gonna make any more promises that I probably won't be able to keep. It would have been cool to have it done in time for the 1-year anniversary of the film, but Oh well. Alright, so then if you're not throwing all your weight into the Lightyear critique, then what are you spending your days working on? Sure, Dial of Destiny is coming out next week, but it's not out yet, and you can't really start creating a review for it until you actually see it, so what are you cooking up in that little editing kitchen of yours? At the moment, there are 3 main projects that I am feverishly trying to get finished, because I've been working on them literally all year long. First, obviously, is my updated Lightyear critique, which I've already gone over and has sort of been put on the back burner in terms of priority. Second, there's my critique of Halo Infinite, where I plan on going into excruciating detail across every facet of the game, from the multiplayer to the campaign, gameplay, story, and everything in between, because I really do love playing the game and hold its campaign in extremely high regard, but I am also highly critical of several significant portions of it, and there's a lot that I want to say about it because Halo is easily my all-time favorite video game franchise. And I think it'll be interesting to make a more balanced critique, highlighting a lot of flaws and a lot of points of praise as opposed to falling into one extreme over the other. I know the majority of my audience is not at all interested in what I have to say on Halo, but to be blunt, I don't really care. I have mountains of passion for this series, and I want to share that passion with all of you. I've had a hard time really solidifying a script for it because it's a live service game, so 343 keeps adding new stuff every season, or more appropriately, 343 keeps breaking new shit every season that causes several portions of my scripts to require a full redraft, but oddly enough, unlike with the Lightyear video, where the more relevant things that pop up about Pixar just depresses me and drains me of passion, I seem to have had the exact opposite effect with Halo Infinite, because every misstep 343 takes just fires me up even more to rip this game apart. And on the campaign side, every comment I receive telling me the story actually sucks only further motivates me to make this video so I can break down why I love it so much. Finally, there's the video I plan on making talking about a TV show called The Owl House. So much of the content I put out is very aggressively negative towards the media that I despise, but this video will be the polar opposite of that in every discernible way. I absolutely adore The Owl House. I've loved it from the moment I first started watching it, and the deeper I've looked into the story, the more impressed I've become with how purposefully every element of nearly every episode is crafted, and I genuinely don't think I'll ever be able to fully express how I feel about it, but I'm gonna try my damnedest to analyze the elements of the show, why they work, why I love them, and what they mean to me on a personal level. And that's all I'll say for now. I've really poured every ounce of heart and soul I had into this one, and I hope that passion shines through in the finished product. And then, of course, alongside all of this, I'm also making audio commentaries with my friends where we react to movies both good and bad, with the most recent addition to our catalog being a double feature of Mulan 1998.
Dude, is this guy made out of paper? Like, what the fuck? Paperweight.
They all have clearly defined personalities.
The bowling.
Oh, hey, Trevor. Look, that's what happened. What's going to happen to the remake?
And Mulan 2020.
Oh,
okay, so she's dead now.
Well, dead.
What? No! What?
That was, you could see the wires. You know, there.
I could literally. Is this like some fucking Blue's Big City Adventure shit where you can see the harness?
What?
Oh my god. Run up straight up, run up
What is
walls,
that?
apparently.
What's the camera doing?
Why? Whoa, slow down, calm the what the fuck is why? They're a blast to record, and judging by the live chat reactions, people seem to have fun watching them even if they aren't as popular as the main reviews. But so long as we continue to enjoy reacting to movies together, we'll keep making audio commentaries for you all to enjoy. So long story short, there are 3 massive projects that I'm actively developing alongside smaller scale audio commentaries, and then of course we have Dial of Destiny on the horizon to look forward to next week. The Lightyear critique is still happening. It will eventually be finished, assuming no other major Pixar bombshells drop anytime soon. I just can't promise a specific release date. What I can promise, however, is all the other things I just mentioned, and a whole lot more throughout the rest of the year as far as reviews and critiques are concerned. I know this probably wasn't what you wanted to hear about Lightyear, but I hope that you'll think the video was worth the wait when it eventually comes out. For now, though, I'm gonna get back to work on all 3 of those projects, and a whole bunch of audio commentaries my friends and I have recorded that we can't wait to share with you all. Thank you all once again for showing your continued support for the channel, because without you, I wouldn't have an audience to even make content for in the first place. I hope you enjoyed today's video, I hope you're looking forward to the upcoming slate of content I have prepared for the summer, and I hope to see you all soon for whatever it is you decide to watch next. Goodbye!